Some deaths are accidents. This one was a choice, 100 small choices. Picture the trailhead. It looks nothing like a threshold. No warning sign in flashing red, no ranger waving you back, no gate swinging shut behind you. Just a dirt parking lot, a green wall of trees, and the particular arrogance of a place you have visited before. You leave the trail for a moment because you have walked here before. You do not carry extra water because you will be back soon. You leave your phone behind because nature is supposed to be an escape from the very device that could save your life. The forest does not argue with your confidence. It simply waits. Beneath its canopy, familiar landmarks disappear, game trails imitate real ones, and every attempt to fix a small mistake quietly carries you farther from safety. Nature does not punish arrogance. It rewards preparation and exposes complacency. By the time you realize you're lost, the wilderness has already rewritten the rules, and it did not need a storm or a cliff or a single dramatic failure to do it. It only needed time and your certainty that you already knew the way. These are the warnings they ignored. This is preventable, a familiar trail. For Amanda Eller, her afternoon hike would become a tragedy, one she was fortunate against enormous odds to survive. She was 35 years old, a physical therapist, a yoga instructor, the kind of person who moved through her days with the fluency of someone who understood her own body better than most people ever will, who had spent a career teaching other people how to heal, how to move without injury, how to listen to the small signals a body sends before something goes wrong. She lived on Maui, an island where the ocean is never more than a short drive away, and the interior forest is treated by longtime residents as an old and familiar neighbor, not a wilderness, not a threat, just green space, the kind you drive past on the way to somewhere else, until the day you decide to walk into it instead. On May 8, 2019, that familiarity is exactly what kills her sense of caution. She drove out to the Makawao Forest Reserve, a patchwork of trails cut through eucalyptus groves and native brush on the slopes above the town. She had hiked there before, more than once. This was not an expedition. It was not even, by her own later account, meant to be a long outing. A short loop, some light exercise, a window of solitude before the rest of her day resumed its usual shape. The kind of hike thousands of people take every week without incident, which is precisely what makes stories like hers so difficult to hear. There was no red flag, no forecast she ignored, no trail closures she stepped around, no obvious warning signs she walked past without reading. She parked her car, and then, one by one, quietly, without any single moment that felt like a turning point, she made the decisions that would nearly cost her everything. She left her cell phone in the vehicle, no backpack, no food, no navigation equipment beyond her own memory of a trail she assumed she already understood, no emergency shelter, no way to build one, no way to signal for one. No satellite beacon, the kind of device that, for the cost of a few $100s, exists solely to answer the question search teams would spend the next 17 days asking. She wore light athletic clothing, breathable, comfortable, built for an hour movement. Nothing built to survive a night outdoors, let alone more than 2 weeks of them exposed to rain, humidity, insects, and injury. Friends expected her home later that day. She never arrived. What looked like one of the safest decisions of the day, visiting a trail she already knew, would quietly become the first link in a chain that was already pulling her away from everything familiar. It is worth sitting with that fact for a moment because it is the thesis of everything that follows. The danger did not arrive from outside. It was already present in the choices she carried with her long before the forest ever closed in around her. The forest doesn't need to be big. There is a myth about getting lost. The myth says it happens in vast, remote places with no roads for 100 miles, places where the nearest town is a rumor whispered by locals. The myth is comforting because it implies that danger only exists somewhere far away, somewhere you would never casually visit on a Wednesday afternoon. The myth is wrong. Some of the most dangerous places to disappear are small, familiar, and minutes from a paved road. Makawao Forest Reserve is one of them. It is not enormous. On a map, it looks almost modest. A green patch tucked into the upcountry slopes of Maui, minutes from homes and highways. Close enough that residents drive past its edge on ordinary errands without a second thought. But size on a map means nothing to a body moving through dense tropical vegetation at ground level. The reserve is a maze of steep ravines, hidden stream beds, waterfalls carved into volcanic rock over centuries, and a canopy so thick overhead that visibility at ground level can drop to only a few yards in any direction. A person could be shouting 50 feet away and never be heard. A person could be standing in plain sight and never be seen. This is where the second kind of danger hides, not distance, but disguise. Wild pig trails cut through the undergrowth in patterns that, to an exhausted or disoriented hiker, look identical to maintained paths. They wind in the right general direction. They are packed down by regular use, just like a real trail. They do not announce themselves as false. They do not fork with a sign reading wrong way. They simply exist, indifferent to the fact that a person might follow one, believing with complete confidence that it leads home. Overhead, the same canopy that made the forest beautiful also made it nearly impossible to search from the air. Search helicopters can fly directly above a missing person, engines roaring, downdraft bending the treetops, and see nothing but a solid, unbroken ceiling of green. Thermal imaging struggles against dense foliage and warm, humid air. A human body, even an injured one radiating heat, can be rendered functionally invisible by a few layers of leaves. Meanwhile, on the ground, constant moisture works against the human body in ways that are easy to underestimate from the comfort of a dry climate. Skin that stays wet for days softens and breaks down far faster than skin exposed to dry heat. Fatigue accelerates when clothing never fully dries. Small wounds, a scrape against bark, a cut from volcanic rock, become infections faster than they would almost anywhere else, because the same humidity that makes the forest lush also makes it an efficient breeding ground for bacteria. Search and rescue experts who have worked cases like this one point to a specific brutal irony that recurs again and again in tropical terrain. Lost hikers often remain shockingly close to where they started, not miles away, sometimes less than a mile, sometimes only a few hundred yards from a trail that hundreds of other hikers walk safely every week. And yet they become effectively invisible, swallowed by a landscape that does not need vast distance to erase a person, only density and moisture, and a canopy that keeps its secrets from everyone looking down from above. The wilderness did not trap Amanda all at once. It simply offered her one convincing wrong turn after another, each one small, each one reasonable, each one indistinguishable in the moment from the correct path home. The 100 small choices. This is the part of the story that resists easy narration because there was no single dramatic mistake to point to, no cliff edge misjudged in a moment of bravado, no storm rolling in against a stubborn refusal to turn back, no one warning sign ignored in defiance. Instead, there was accumulation, 100 small choices, each one reasonable in isolation, each one narrowing the door a little further until the door was gone entirely and no one, least of all Amanda, could say exactly when it had closed. Amanda stopped to rest. It was, in itself, a sensible decision. The kind any hiker makes without thinking twice. The kind that costs nothing under ordinary circumstances. When she stood back up and resumed walking, she believed, with the kind of quiet certainty that comes from having walked a place before, that she knew the direction that would carry her back to the trailhead. She was wrong. Instead of immediately locating the established trail, instead of stopping fully, orienting herself against a landmark, confirming her direction before committing to it, she continued forward. Unknowingly, she began following one of the pig trails that mimicked the maintained path so convincingly. Each step along it felt like progress. Each step was, in fact, carrying her farther from where she needed to be, farther from the road, farther from her car, farther from anyone who might think to look for her along a route she had never actually taken. This is where the earlier decisions began to compound, the way debt compounds, quietly, invisibly, until the total is suddenly unmanageable. Leaving her phone in the car had already stripped her of the ability to call for help, to check a map, to receive a search alert, to share her location with a single tap, the way millions of hikers do every day without a second thought, without a compass, without a whistle, without an emergency blanket, without food, without a way to purify water, without a locator beacon. Every hour that passed did not simply pass. It cost her something irreplaceable. Each hour eroded a resource she could not buy back later: time, energy, daylight, and the narrowing window in which a small mistake could still be corrected before it hardened into a crisis with its own momentum. Then the terrain took its turn, the way it always eventually does with someone who has stopped being certain of where they are. At some point during her disorientation, Amanda fell. It was not a small stumble, not a twisted ankle she could walk off. She dropped roughly 20 feet down a slope or ravine edge, and when she landed, her left tibia fractured. In an instant, an already dangerous situation became something categorically worse. Mobility, the one asset that might have let her retrace her steps, search methodically for the trail, cover ground toward rescue, was suddenly brutally limited. She was now a person with a broken leg, alone, unequipped, in terrain designed by nature to punish exactly that combination of circumstances. There are unverified accounts repeated in the years since by those close to the case that at multiple points she heard helicopters passing overhead, engines cutting through the canopy noise, distant but unmistakable, and that she attempted to signal them despite her injuries, shouting, waving, doing whatever a person with a fractured leg and no equipment could manage, only to remain hidden beneath a ceiling of leaves that gave nothing away to the searchers above. If true, it is one of the cruelest details in the entire ordeal. Rescue passing directly above her again and again, unable to see what was right beneath it, while she lay there listening to it fade back into silence. Once injury entered the equation, survival stopped being about finding the trail. It became about surviving the forest itself, day by day, with a body that was no longer capable of doing what it once could. 17 days underground. What follows is not a story of one crisis. It is a story of a body absorbing 17 consecutive crises, day after day, with no rescue in sight and no way to know if one was even coming. Each morning she woke, if she slept at all, to the same set of facts: injured, unequipped, unreachable, and running out of the reserves her body had carried in with her on what was supposed to be a short afternoon out. Amanda stayed alive by drinking from streams. Water, with no purification, no guarantee of safety, only the calculation, made again and again that dehydration would kill her faster than whatever might be living in the current. She ate whatever she could identify as safe: wild berries, guava, edible plants she recognized from a lifetime spent on the island, and when there was nothing else within reach, insects. It was not survival by skill so much as survival by desperation, matched with just enough knowledge to avoid poisoning herself outright. Every meal was a gamble made without a safety net. The tropical climate, which might sound merciful compared to a snowbound mountain or a waterless desert, extracted its own toll, patiently and continuously. Continuous exposure to rain and humidity broke her skin down in ways a dry climate simply would not. Open wounds did not sit quietly and heal. They festered. Cellulitis set in, spreading heat and swelling beneath the skin. Infection took hold in a body already operating on a catastrophic caloric deficit, a body with nothing left over to spend on fighting bacteria. Her fractured leg turned every movement into an act of pain management, a negotiation between the need to move and the cost of moving. Uneven terrain, difficult enough for an uninjured hiker with 2 working legs, became something closer to torment for a woman dragging herself across roots and rock. And beneath all of it, a compounding, invisible danger was doing its own quiet damage. Dehydration, calorie deprivation, exhaustion, and sleep deprivation working together to erode the one tool she had left, her judgment. The mind that had gotten her lost was now the same mind she needed to keep her alive, and it was deteriorating by the hour, clouding with every past day. At one point, heavy rain sent floodwaters rising near where she had taken shelter, and she found herself trapped by the rising water. A second entirely separate threat layered directly on top of the injury, the infection, and the starvation already working against her. It is a detail that illustrates something the wilderness rarely gets credit for in the retelling. It does not attack in a single form, does not pick one method and commit to it. A tropical forest does not simply threaten a person with distance, or with heat, or with thirst. It threatens with all of them, simultaneously, indifferent to which one ultimately succeeds, patient enough to let them work together. By the time rescue came, Amanda had lost approximately 20 pounds. Weight her body did not have to spare. She had suffered severe sunburn despite the canopy's shade, extensive abrasions across exposed skin, and infections serious enough to require immediate hospitalization the moment she reached medical care. Her body had been rewritten by 17 days of exposure, injury, and starvation into something barely recognizable as the woman who had parked her car for a short afternoon hike, phone left behind, expecting to be home before dark. She had survived long enough for the search to change, but only because other people refused to stop looking for her. The search that wouldn't end. Amanda was reported missing on May 9, 2019, the day after she failed to return home. What followed was one of the largest search efforts in recent Maui history, a coordinated response involving the Maui Police Department, dozens of trained volunteers, helicopters sweeping the ridgelines from dawn until fuel forced them down, drones probing gaps in the canopy that human eyes could not reach, search dogs working scent trails through undergrowth that swallowed sound as easily as it swallowed light, and off-road teams pushing into terrain that vehicles were never designed to handle. Days passed, then more days, and as they did, the official search, the resources of police departments and government agencies, finite by nature and bound by protocol, budget, and manpower, began inevitably to scale back. This is, in almost every missing person case, the moment where hope is expected to quietly recede along with the manpower. The moment when families are gently told, without ever being told outright, that the odds have shifted, that the search will continue but differently, more slowly, with fewer resources committed to it each passing day. It did not, in this case, recede. Amanda's family and a growing network of volunteers refused to accept the pace of the official wind down. They organized independently outside the structure of any agency, driven by a refusal to let the search shrink to match a timeline that assumed the worst. They raised funds to keep private helicopters in the air. Flying search patterns, the official effort could no longer justify funding. They offered a reward of $50,000 for information leading to her location, a number large enough to draw public attention, media coverage, and renewed public will back to a search that institutions had quietly begun to consider unlikely to end in a rescue. On May 24th, 16 days after Amanda disappeared, that persistence paid off. A volunteer helicopter crew, flying a pattern that official search efforts had already moved past, spotted her near a creek and a waterfall above the Kailua Reservoir, a location that, when the coordinates were later plotted against a map, sat only a few miles from where she had entered the forest on what was supposed to be a short, unremarkable afternoon hike. She was airlifted out, treated for the fractured tibia, for cellulitis, for dehydration, for the severe weight loss, for burns, for soft tissue injuries that would take months to fully heal, if they ever fully did. Unlike so many of the stories told on this channel, there was no coroner's report waiting at the end of this one. No criminal investigation, no grave, no memorial service, no family left with nothing but questions about what happened in those final hours. Instead, there was a woman in a hospital bed alive because a search her own government had begun to scale back was kept alive by people who simply refused to stop. And in the years since, Amanda has spoken publicly, repeatedly, candidly, about the decision she now identifies as the one she regrets most, leaving her phone in the car. She has urged others again and again in interviews and public appearances to over-prepare rather than assume that familiarity is the same thing as safety. Her message has never been about blame directed outward. It has always pointed inward at the choices that were hers to make differently. The story ended in survival instead of a funeral, but the chain of decisions that led there remains one of the clearest case studies in how an ordinary outing quietly becomes a life-threatening emergency, and how narrow, how genuinely narrow, the margin can be between the two. You rarely notice the decision that changes everything because it never feels important at the time. It feels like nothing. It feels like leaving your phone in the car so you can enjoy a walk without distraction. It feels like skipping the backpack because the hike is short. It feels like trusting a trail you have walked before because familiarity has always kept you safe until the one time it does not. Until the one afternoon it quietly decides not to. The chain could have broken before Amanda ever stepped past the trailhead, with a phone carried instead of left behind, with a few basic pieces of emergency gear tucked into a small bag, with a simple message to someone telling them exactly where she was going and when to expect her back. It could have broken the moment she realized she was no longer certain of the route, if she had stopped completely instead of continuing forward down what looked like another trail. It could have broken with a satellite beacon, or a whistle, or extra water, or nothing more than the simple assumption that even a familiar forest deserves the same respect owed to a remote and unfamiliar one. Amanda Eller survived when countless others in her position have not survived. But survival should never be mistaken for proof that the risk was ever small, that the danger was ever less real for how ordinary the day had felt at the start. She endured 17 days of pain, injury, infection, and isolation because a series of ordinary, forgettable decisions quietly compounded into a catastrophe that no single moment could have predicted. The forest never hunted her. It was not cruel, and it never had to be. It simply remained indifferent, while each small choice narrowed every possible way out, and every step of it was preventable. If you've made it this far, consider subscribing. It might be the cheapest piece of survival gear you ever pick up. Want more preventable? These stories are next. Thank you for watching.